When I published my first book, I was getting ready to do an interview with a brother from the radio station in DCW. It's PFW.
WPFW 89.3 FM.
Yeah, and they ultimately selected my books for a premium for a fundraiser. So this was a prior interview by a brother who had graduated from Howard with a PhD. And he was going over some questions with me about what the interview was going to be about. And I told him, I'm going to send you the book. It's like, great. So when we started talking, then he said, wait a minute, are you saying sovereignty? I said, yes. He said, oh, I thought you meant solidarity, like solidarity. And then he told me, I'm going to have to do some brushing up. And I'd asked him, did you study sovereignty when you got your PhD? And he said, no, we never came across the word. So you have people who graduated, have these degrees, PhD, political science, and sovereignty is alien to their political thought.
Doctor,
that should be central to a liberal democracy. Sovereignty should be central to a liberal democracy. Okay, but when they come and they're selling you the liberal democracy, it has nothing to do with sovereignty.
Yeah.
It has to do with whether or not you have a voting machine. And nobody hijacked the vote. Yeah. Right? And what does the vote mean? And, okay, who picked the guy you're voting for? Who supported his campaign?
What is this philosophy?
It's a shell game.
Yeah, what's this philosophy? Who controls what?
Yeah.
How, when, and where? So, Dr. Garvey, if I were to ask you, what your concept of sovereignty, what your concept of sovereignty is, what would you say?
No. Actually, Ezrah is the one that's educated me on sovereignty. I think about it from the perspective of civilization. And if you're saying the same thing, you're using a different word, but I think you're making it more explicit in terms of what the civilization is, in terms of the people within the civilization. I look at the civilization more from the perspective of education and religion and economics, etc. But when you use the term sovereignty, you're actually using it in very much a political sense, as a fundamental definition of how a society functions, not in its separate parts, but in its totality, and what that means for the individual citizen.
Correct.
And that, to me, is almost a novel concept, but that's where it goes when you talk about a civilization, and that's when you talked about the Chinese before. The Chinese put themselves forward as a civilization.
Right.
It's an ancient civilization. These are our principles. This is what we defend.
Right.
We don't have that. This is what my daddy was trying to give back to us as a people. That we're an African civilization.
Dr. Garvey, I'm listening to you, and what you're saying is so profound. I was in Jamaica, your beloved country, my country too, I like to say, at the University of West Indies, Mona. We're going to meet Bruce Golding, who was the former Prime Minister, who has an office there. We've been taken to him by his son, Stephen Golding, who supposedly is the chair of the UNIA in Jamaica. And as we are going, Dr. Ezra, you need to hear this, I saw like a lion, but it's a sort of Chinese rendition of the lion. And it says Confucius Institute. Okay? So there's a Confucius Institute on the campus of the University of the West Indies. The first university in the English-speaking Caribbean was started at Mona in, I believe, 1948. And I turned to Steve, and I said, Steve, if we have a Confucius Institute at the University of West Indies, where is the African Institute or the Marcus Garvey Institute? And he had no answer. Your thoughts?
I'm not going to get involved at this point, and the reasons I've...
Yeah, of course, but you understand.
But yeah.
Yeah, you understand. The thing about it is, that comes from his comment about the Chinese coming from an ancient civilization, and they're putting forth who they are. It's interesting that the Chinese Communist Party, when it came to office, didn't come to office talking about Confucius. They came to office talking about Marx, Lenin, and Engels. However, what they have done over the years is they've evolved to a place where they realized that those ideas were insufficient to encapsulate the sum totality of their existence, and they have begun now to go back into the very genesis of their civilization. Tell me what you think that means in the way that they've approached things, and what that means for people of African descent.
Well, China is for the Chinese, and that's clear because only people of Chinese identity are Chinese. And when you look at what happened to Africa from slavery to colonialism, it was a disruption of sovereignty. It dispossessed, disinherited African people, black people, of sovereignty. It wasn't just simply a matter of slavery or colonialism. It was disruption and dispossession, disinheritance of that concept of sovereignty. And so today you see the fallout, the spillover of that, where the concept is only vaguely understood. So African nations, the African Union, I would argue there's a immediate need to have a common definition of sovereignty in principle and in practice. Individual states can remain and continue to be independent, but collectively there has to be this commonality of understanding of the principles and the practices of what sovereignty is in the 21st century. So, a quick example. Just a few years ago, if you were a government, you wouldn't have to worry about cyber security. What is cyber security? Now, sovereignty is more than just air, land, and sea. Now there's this thing called cyberspace. So if freedom changes, it evolves, it's an evolution. The same thing with the way people understand and embrace this concept of freedom, and that's to continually evolve. It's a moving target. And for Africans here in America, there's a over-romanticizing and this politics of nostalgia that relates to the 60s. That, sure, freedom is anchored in there, but we have to get 21st century anchors. Otherwise, just as a government would neglect to understand what cyberspace is about, you can easily neglect to understand what these modern day new principles and practices of freedom should entail. So that's why the concept is extraordinarily important, because it's central to the way that freedom should be
Earlier,
understood.
before Dr. Garvey returned, I said to you how important it was to embrace that idea of sovereignty as you outlined it, with a sense of dignity, of statehood, of running your own affairs. But how important it was as well for us to embrace the essential elements of integrity in office, a parliament that operates to allow people freedom of association, freedom of thought.
That's a part of the definition.
Yes.
As I said earlier, it's a relative concept, but it has to have concrete connections to development. And you can't have development if civil society is at unrest, if development and opportunities do not translate to everyday people. So whatever formula has to be created to make sure that what we know of as sovereignty is translated equally in governance, development, civil society, in ways that the three are interconnected, so that the nation and the nation state functions in ways that become exemplary. That's what's important. And we need exemplary African nations.
Indeed, because if you don't, then people are going to keep on leaving and killing themselves, crossing from Tunisia to go into Spain and Italy, and that's just the reality. We have to have exemplary nations that can retain the intelligentsia, retain the lifeblood that is necessary for forward movement. I want to just thank you, Dr. Ezrah Aharone, for your illuminating those issues for us today at the Black World Summit. And we want to thank you, Dr. Garvey, for all you've done to perpetuate the noble facets of your father's efforts to ensure that we're sovereign people, proud to be of African origin, disciplined and organized, and most important, industrious, productive. Thank you, sir.